Welcome back to Dolor Factor Live. I'm here with Angus Macmillan and we're talking about attitudes, about facing that if you don't look at yourself properly, you may be jeopardizing the happiness in your life. So I think I'd like to start with a re-examination of our attitudes. I mean, where are attitudes formed?
Well, that's in a very strange way kind of a continuation of what we were talking about just for the break. Mm-hmm. Those things that happen to us as we grow, and the core beliefs that are formed as a consequence of that. Core beliefs hopefully change as time goes along. Often they don't. So we might say this person behaves childishly rather than childlike. Mm-hmm. But really it's about how we think. For example, if someone has been abandoned by a parent, then there are issues around, as a consequence of that, there are issues, especially if it's an early age, issues around how to trust people in relationships, things like that. So really our attitudes are based in our thinking. The way we think drives our attitudes. So if I think negatively, then when I interact with you, I'm going to come across as somewhat negative in my perspective of whatever it is we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, those attitudes drive our behaviors. So that if I have a negative attitude, then my behaviors are going to be correspondingly negative and problematic for me. Mm-hmm. Part of why this particular issue, I think that what we're covering tonight, are you part of the problem, is of essence here, is that many of us don't recognize our negativity. So that we tend not to think of how we might be part of the problem. It's always the other person that's part of the problem. I'm being quite normal, but of course I am, because it is all that I know, until I find out something else that I have not yet learned. Life has a way of teaching us lessons if we would allow life to teach us those lessons. Mm-hmm. The peculiar thing is that when we form patterns in our lives. Often when somebody comes to treatment, there's a psychosocial intake form, which is kind of formal. But I tend to like to use something called a lifeline, which looks at your entire life from your own perspective of all the things that are significant. So you write them down on a piece of paper, and then you put them on a line which follows your life.
That's a very painful thing to do.
It is, but therapy is often not without pain. It is often, I mean, a couple of my clients call the particular chair that they sit in their crying chair. Mm-hmm. But what they say is that they cry and then they feel better because they've let some of the stuff out.
I always wondered why we have to go back into the past, because when people have problems or when they go to counsellors, what they're expecting is, I have a problem, I have an issue, it's happening right now, and I want you to help me with this right now. Yeah. They're not interested in going back into the history.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
But it's a vital thing, isn't it?
To some degree. It depends on the theoretical base upon which you work. Some people work solely in the present, but I find that very difficult, because the present is affected by your past. What are the patterns of your past? And is this the pattern? And therefore, how do we deal with that pattern in your life? You know, if I'm having problems in a relationship today, and with trust, difficulty communicating, is that based in how I was as a child? Where did I learn that behavior from? And the behavior, of course, is driven by the attitudes. Mm-hmm. The attitudes are driven by the thinking. So that it's important in my mind to look at, where does the thinking come from? Where is it that I've learned that I'm not good enough? Where is it that I've learned, on the other hand, that I'm better than everyone else, and that I have some sort of entitlement to be a particular way, even though that way is creating problems for me in my life. And I don't see it because I'm not willing to change that. You know, and sometimes people make a decision that they're going to change, but they don't stay with that decision because there is a fear of change. It's going to change my personality.
Yes. That's what I think about when I think of people being in relationships that are supposed to be loving relationships, and they stay in them, and they're actually not good for you. But because it's what you're used to, you have a fear of leaving. And sometimes these relationships are abusive. They're violent. You know, it's not a case of, well, I'm not happy anymore. They're just not good for you, but people stay there, and I call that habitual love because it's just habits.
Well, yes, it is. It's almost an addiction. I have to have love in my life. That's also why some people come to me, or they find out that that's why they come to me, is that one cannot use someone else to fill that empty space within. That has to be filled from inside. So using someone else to make yourself feel complete is bound to create problems in your life because they cannot make you feel complete. So
okay, one of the hardest things is to recognize that your attitude isn't good, because sometimes it's just like, you know, when you're so much in love, you're blind. You're just blind. So how can you recognize then that really it's your attitude that's preventing certain things from happening in your life? Sometimes people say, well, I tried to get a job for so long, I'm not getting the job, I don't understand, I look the part, I do this, why am I getting, you know, and they're upset with others. Can't they see that I've prepared, I look the part?
yes.
And then they'll say, oh, because they give it to a friend or something like that, because it's just easier for them to find a reason or an avenue to blame someone else.
Well, yes, it is. But the reality is that if indeed you are qualified for a particular job and you have the ability to perform that job, that type of job, and something keeps going wrong in the interviews, what is it that you're doing wrong in the interview? What is it that you're presenting to the interviewer, apart from the physical self, which is important, but also your attitude comes across in an interview. Interviewers ask very specific questions, and they look for specific types of answers to say, that's a tick, or that's a cross. And if you're not aware of that, then I mean that's about career coaching as an example, which I've done a little bit of, but I'm not terribly competent in that area. But yes, that is about. It is about an attitude. It is about presenting in a particular way. You know?
But how could you? Okay, let's look at a scenario here. How could you yourself? Okay, I'm going to put it this way. Sometimes we're doing something, and especially women call it the feminine women's instinct. You just feel that there's something wrong. You just know there is something wrong, but yet you do nothing. You just let the moment pass, and it keeps on going on, and then you do it again. You think, there's just not something right here. Now, when you get into yourself into that kind of situation, would you say the best thing to do is to not ignore that feeling of there's something wrong here, and actually try and face what it is you think may be wrong?
It's always best to follow, in my experience, always best to follow your feelings, because your feelings, whilst they may not, your feelings are your feelings, and therefore they're neither right nor wrong. But those feelings may be based in something which makes them distorted, which causes them to be distorted, and often that's based in something called cognitive distortion, i.e. the thinking is slightly skewed, again, by past experience. So that I work my way into situations, and I always think the same way, without questioning the thinking. But also the reality is that I don't know, many people go off in a particular direction, and think that is the way that they should be. But I always say we don't live in a should-be world, we live in a world of reality. And if it is that your thinking is creating a problem for you, then you need to look at that. But that's, again, it's not easy to do, because then somebody is accusing you of being not as good as the next person. And that tends to be something that we put our backs up against, and we don't want to go there. But the reality is that sometimes if we need to look at something, we need to look at it. I do that all the time with myself. I have my own therapist in England. I Skype once a week. Because if I'm trying to help, for example, if you're my client trying to help you, I need to know that I have helped myself. I need to know that I come with a clean plate, and I'm not going to be there to judge you. And one of the ways to do that is just to offload all of the stuff and to talk about in therapy the stuff that's affecting me and that's creating difficulties for me in my own life.
Well, I think that it's one of the things that I would have found frustrating, being a counsellor, in having to keep it all in. And yes, we know we do have to have our own counsellors, and if we have to face ourselves, then it'll be easier for us to ask others to examine themselves. Well, thank you for being with us. When we come back, we're going to look at another area in life that strongly believes in, in attitudes in our relationships. All right, we're going to be looking at certain patterns. So stay with us on Dolor Factor Live. We'll be right back.